The first thing I noticed wasn't the silence, it was the light. Sunlight poured through the kitchen window at an odd angle, brighter than usual, bouncing off the countertop where my coffee had already gone cold. Something felt off. I stood there longer than I should have, staring out the window above the sink, until my eyes finally landed where they didn't expect to. The garage door was open. Dennis never left it open. Not once in 43 years of marriage. Rain or shine, sick or healthy, that door was always shut by nightfall. Even after he got tired. Even after his hands began to ache. And Dennis had been gone 8 months. My chest tightened as I set the mug down. Slowly, like my body already knew what my mind was refusing to accept, I walked toward the back door. The April air brushed my face, warm, gentle, wrong for a moment like this. I crossed the yard in my slippers, the grass brushing my ankles. I'd been meaning to hire someone to mow it. Everything had become a list of things I'd been meaning to do since my husband died. The concrete inside the garage was cold beneath my feet. The space where the car should have been was empty. Not cluttered. Not disturbed. Just vacant. A dark oil stain marked the exact place where it had rested for 20 years. The outline of absence was unmistakable, like a shadow burned into the floor. I stood there, staring at nothing, my mind struggling to process what my eyes already understood. Dennis's workbench was untouched. Every tool hung in its place, outlined in black marker the way he liked it, precision even in rest. His red toolbox sat closed. His old radio remained silent. The faint smell of oil, leather, and that citrus hand soap he always used still lingered in the air. But the car was gone. I gripped the doorframe and forced myself to breathe. In through the nose. Out through the mouth. 40 years as an ICU nurse had trained my body to stay steady even when everything inside was collapsing. I walked to the workbench and picked up his journal. The pages were filled with his careful handwriting, notes, measurements, reminders. The last entry was dated 3 weeks before he died. The letters were looser than usual. Like his hands had been tired. Almost finished. 20 years of work. Can't wait to teach Carol to drive her properly. Our road trip starts next summer. I closed the journal and pressed it to my chest. Then I heard an engine outside. A sleek black BMW rolled into the driveway, shiny and unfamiliar against the quiet house Dennis had built with his own hands. My son Brian stepped out. 38 years old, shoulders already slumped before he even reached me. He wouldn't look me in the eye. The passenger door opened, and Vanessa emerged, perfect posture, flawless hair. Sunglasses too expensive for a weekday morning. She stood still, observing me like someone assessing property. Brian stopped near the edge of the driveway. "Mom," he said, voice tight. "I need to talk to you." "Where's the car?" I asked. He swallowed. "I sold it." The words landed strangely, like a sentence spoken underwater. "You what?" "I sold it yesterday," he said quickly, eyes flicking toward the empty garage. "I needed the money. Vanessa and I are going to Paris. It's important for her work." That car wasn't just metal and rubber. It was Dennis's last promise. His hands. His patience. His future. That was your father's car, I said quietly. Dad's gone, Brian snapped, defensiveness rushing in to fill the guilt. You don't even drive it. It was just sitting there. Vanessa stepped closer, resting her manicured hand on Brian's arm. It's done, Carol, she said calmly. We leave tomorrow. I looked at my son. He looked away. They didn't see the empty garage the way I did. They didn't see the years. They didn't see what was about to come back to haunt all of us. I thought losing the car was the worst betrayal I would face. I had no idea that its disappearance was only the beginning, and that one phone call the next morning would expose a truth my husband had hidden for nearly 2 years. I didn't sleep that night. The house made unfamiliar sounds once Brian and Vanessa left, soft clicks, distant creaks, the hum of the refrigerator too loud in the dark. I sat at the kitchen table with Dennis's journal open in front of me, reading the same paragraph over and over as if repetition might change its meaning. Teach Carol to drive her properly. I traced the words with my finger. Dennis had always believed in planning ahead. In preparing for what came next. Even death, it seemed. At exactly 7:02 the next morning, the phone rang. An unknown number. I stared at it, irritation mixing with exhaustion. For a moment, I considered letting it ring out. Nothing good ever came from early calls anymore, just reminders of appointments, bills, or condolences that had already grown stale. I answered anyway. Mrs. Bennet. A man's voice, rough, like he'd been awake all night. My name is Tom Graves. I have your husband's car. I sat up so fast my chair scraped the floor. My husband's what? The Shelby, he said gently. Your son brought it to my dealership yesterday. There's something Dennis wanted you to know. Something he asked me to tell you if this ever happened. My heart began to pound in my ears. I don't understand. I know, he replied. I'm sorry. I should have called sooner. I was at your husband's funeral. I didn't have the courage then. The room felt smaller, tighter. Where are you? He gave me an address on the east side of town. An industrial stretch I rarely visited. Please, he added. Come as soon as you can. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I dressed quickly, jeans, a sweater, and grabbed my keys. As I drove, the city passed by in quiet motion. I went by the hospital where I'd worked most of my life, the parking lot already full. Familiar roads, familiar turns. My hands stayed steady on the wheel, but my thoughts raced. The dealership stood at the end of a long street, clean and modern, surrounded by a fence lined with vintage cars gleaming in the morning sun. A man waited outside, grey-haired, shoulders squared like he'd rehearsed this meeting. Mrs. Bennet, he said, extending a trembling hand. Thank you for coming. You said you had my husband's car, I replied. Yes. And more than that. He hesitated. Dennis saved my life. We sat on the curb outside the building as he spoke. 25 years earlier, he'd been desperate, bad credit, no backing, just a dream of opening a classic auto shop. Dennis had co-signed a loan for him without telling me. Risked everything for a man he barely knew. This place exists because of him, Tom said, wiping his eyes. I never forgot that. When Brian sold him the car, Tom had known immediately what it was, and what it meant. Your son had no idea what he was selling, he said quietly. What is it really worth? I asked. He met my eyes. About $180,000. The number didn't make sense. It floated uselessly between us. 180. It's a documented 67 Shelby, he said. Museum quality. Dennis restored it. Perfectly. Brian had sold it for $15,000. I felt dizzy and sat back down, the concrete cold even through my jeans. Tom didn't rush me. He waited. I bought it, he said at last. But I never planned to keep it. Dennis made me promise something 2 years ago. He stood and held out his hand. You need to see the car. Inside the garage, under bright lights, the Shelby waited beneath a cover. When Tom pulled it back, the burgundy paint shone like it was alive. I ran my hand along the hood, feeling Dennis in every curve. He asked me to help him install something, Tom said. A hidden compartment. He said if anything ever happened to him, you'd need to know. My pulse thundered. Tom showed me how to release the panel behind the radio. Then he stepped away, giving me privacy. Inside, I found a folder. An envelope with my name on it. And a small wooden box with a key. Dennis's handwriting stared back at me. And in that moment, I understood something terrifying. My husband hadn't just been restoring a car. He'd been preparing for a war. I thought the folder held memories or insurance papers. I was wrong. What Dennis hid inside that car wasn't meant to comfort me, it was meant to protect me from someone already inside our family. My hands shook as I opened the envelope. Dennis's handwriting filled the page, steady, familiar, unmistakably his. The letter was dated 2 months before his death. Carol, if you're reading this, then I didn't have enough time. The words blurred as my eyes filled. I forced myself to keep reading. I should have told you everything sooner. You would have wanted to face this together. But I needed proof before I involved you, or Brian. I sank into the driver's seat of the Shelby, the leather cool beneath me, the smell of oil. An old leather wrapping around my chest like a memory. I've been watching Vanessa for 18 months. My breath caught. She isn't who she says she is. Her stories don't line up. Her past is carefully edited. And she has done this before. My mind raced back through every interaction, her polite smiles, her subtle questions. About the house, about my health, about finances. I'd brushed them off as concern. As curiosity. As nothing. Dennis Haddon. In the folder, you'll find everything I've gathered so far. It's not enough yet. Brian won't believe accusations without proof, and she's very good at what she does. Very good. I opened the folder. Photographs spilled across my lap. Vanessa at a wedding, arm linked with a grey-haired man who wasn't my son. Another photo. Different wedding. Different man. Marriage. Certificates. Copies. Names I didn't recognize. Dates that overlapped. My heart pounded. She targets men with aging parents and family assets, Dennis had written in the margins. She studies first. Moves slowly. At the bottom of the letter, his final instructions were written with unmistakable urgency. The key in the wooden box opens our safe deposit box at First National. Box 447. I bought stock years ago, as a favor to a patient. Check the value. You'll be taken care of. Taken care of. Dennis had been protecting me in ways I never imagined. I pressed the letter to my chest and cried, deep, shaking sobs that echoed inside the car. Tom stood silently at the garage entrance, giving me the dignity of privacy. When I finally stepped out, my legs felt weak. He knew, I whispered. Tom nodded. He came to me 6 months before he died. Asked me to help him finish what he started. Said he was afraid he'd run out of time. And he did, I said softly. Tom hesitated. There are names in that folder, Carol. Men who lost everything. I need to speak to them, I replied. One of the numbers Dennis had written belonged to a man in Phoenix. I called him from Tom's office, putting the phone on speaker so there would be a witness. The man answered after 3 rings. Stanley Wright, he said. When I explained who I was, there was a long pause. Then a sigh so heavy it felt like grief traveling through the line. I was wondering when someone would call, he said. His story unfolded slowly, meeting Vanessa at a community center, her patience, her charm. How she convinced him his mother was declining. How they sold his mother's home to pay for care she never needed. How the money disappeared. How Vanessa vanished. My mother kept asking when she could go home, he said quietly. There was no home left. I closed my eyes. The second call was no easier. George Murphy. Tampa. Another marriage. Another vanished account. Another life dismantled piece by piece. She's already started with your son, George warned. Small doubts. Gentle suggestions. Don't wait. When I ended the call, my hands were numb. Dennis hadn't been paranoid. He'd been racing time. Tom leaned back in his chair. Dennis worked with a private investigator, he said. Peter Coleman. He's been waiting. I stared at the folder on the desk, at the weight of truth my husband had left behind. I need to go to the bank, I said. And then I need to finish what Dennis started. Because Vanessa wasn't finished yet. And neither was I. By the time I left the dealership, I knew one thing for certain, my husband didn't just leave me evidence, he left me a responsibility. And the woman who sold herself as family was already planning her next move. The vault at First National smelled like cold metal and polish. The manager led me through the narrow corridor without asking questions. Box 447 slid free with a soft click when the key turned. Inside was a single envelope, thicker than expected. Dennis's handwriting greeted me again. Carol, if you're standing in the vault, then things are already moving faster than I hoped. I swallowed hard and opened the envelope. Stock certificates. Row after row of numbers. Dates from the early 90s. A modest investment that had grown quietly, patiently, just like Dennis. When the manager returned with a printout, her eyes widened. Mrs. Bennett, these shares are currently valued at approximately $340,000. The number settled heavily into my chest. Dennis hadn't just left me memories. He left me leverage. That afternoon, I met Peter Coleman at a coffee shop near the hospital. He was calm. Methodical, the kind of man who spoke only when he had something worth saying. Dennis had trusted him. That was enough for me. She's already active again, Peter said, sliding a folder across the table. Online. Caregiver forums. Financial research. Searches for memory care facilities. Assisted living costs. She's laying groundwork. My stomach twisted. She hasn't committed a crime here yet, he continued. But her pattern is consistent. Phase 1 is emotional bonding. Phase 2 is isolation. Phase 3 is control through concern. And Phase 4? I asked. Asset transfer, he said simply. The house. Savings. Anything accessible. I thought about Vanessa's casual comments. You seem tired, Carol. This house is a lot. For one person. Questions disguised as care. She's in the setup phase, Peter said. Once they are back from Paris, she'll escalate. I drove home and opened my notebook. For 2 hours, I wrote down everything I'd ignored over the past 2 years. Every comment. Every question. Every glance that lingered a second too long. 2 months ago, Brian asked where I kept the deed. 6 weeks ago, Vanessa photographed every room during a visit. 1 month ago, Brian accused me of forgetting lunch plans we never made. 3 weeks ago, Vanessa commented on my confusion. 2 weeks ago, a brochure for a luxury memory care facility slipped from her purse. The pattern was unmistakable. That evening, Brian called to thank me again for understanding about the car. His voice was distant. Distracted. We are having dinner when we get back, Vanessa said in the background. Talk soon. She was confident. She didn't know what I knew. They returned from Paris on a Tuesday. Tanned. Smiling. Vanessa wore clothes I'd never seen, expensive, deliberate. At dinner, she controlled the conversation, painting images of the life they deserved. This house is really too big for you, Carol, she said lightly, cutting into her steak. Have you thought about downsizing? Brian nodded. We worry about you being here alone, Mom. Her words coming out of his mouth. I'm managing just fine, I replied calmly. Vanessa smiled. Of course. We just care about your safety. After dinner, she excused herself to the bathroom and disappeared upstairs. 10 minutes passed. I found her near Dennis's old office, pretending to be lost. Oh, she laughed. So many rooms. That night, I documented everything. The next morning, I called Brian. I need to talk to you, I said. About your father. Something I found. Silence. Then, reluctantly, okay. He arrived alone. Good. Dennis's folder sat between us on the table. Before you say anything, Brian said defensively, if this is about Vanessa. Listen, I said firmly. Just listen. I placed the letter in his hands. He read. The color drained from his face. This isn't real, he said. Dad never trusted her. Call the men, I replied. Prove him wrong. He stood abruptly. I'm not doing this. He left angry, confused, torn. And all I could do was wait. Because now the truth was in his hands. And once truth touches someone, it never lets go quietly. I didn't know whether Brian would call those numbers, or run straight back to Vanessa. Either way, the clock had started. And whatever choice my son made, Next would change everything. The waiting was worse than the confrontation. I spent the evening pacing the house, stopping only to stare at Dennis's tools hanging untouched in the garage. The clock seemed louder than usual, every tick pressing against my ribs. I replayed Brian's face over and over, the disbelief, the anger, the hurt. Beneath it all. At midnight, my phone rang. Brian's name lit up the screen. I answered before the second ring. "Mom," he said, his voice broken. "I called them. I called both of them." I sank into the kitchen chair, gripping the edge of the table. "What did they tell you?" A shaky breath. "Everything. Their mothers. Their money. The same story. Same pattern." His voice cracked. "How could I not see it? You trusted someone you loved," I said softly. "That doesn't make you weak." "I went home after I left you," he continued. "I couldn't stop thinking about Dad. So I tested her. Asked simple questions. Where she grew up. Her maiden name." My heart pounded. And she contradicted herself. Completely. Different towns. Different stories. He paused. When I asked about the credit cards in my name, her face changed. Like something dropped. I closed my eyes. "She said I was weak," Brian whispered. "Said your husband warned her I'd be easy to control." Then she packed a bag and left. "She ran," I said. "Yes." I called Peter Coleman immediately. "She checked into an airport hotel," he said without hesitation. "Booked a one-way flight. She's leaving in the morning." The word running echoed in my head. At 3 a.m., we gathered in my kitchen, Peter, Brian, and me. Brian looked hollow. Like something had been hollowed out and left behind. "She's wanted in 2 other states," Peter explained. "Fraud. Identity theft. We can stop her if we act now." Brian nodded slowly. "Do it." We drove through empty streets, the city quiet and unaware. At the airport, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Travelers queued for early flights, oblivious to the reckoning unfolding beside them. Then I saw her. Vanessa moved through the terminal like nothing had changed, heels clicking. Sunglasses on, confidence intact. 2 large suitcases rolled behind her. The detectives approached. We need to speak with you." Her smile faltered, just for a fraction of a second. When they said her real name, something snapped. She ran. Security tackled her before she reached the gate. Her luggage spilled open. Cash. Documents. Passports with different names. When she saw Brian, her composure shattered. "You did this," she screamed. "You're nothing. You think anyone would ever really want you?" I stepped in front of my son. Police dragged her away, still screaming, still fighting. And then she was gone. 2 weeks later, Brian filed for annulment. The marriage had never been legal. The identity she used wasn't real. Vanessa, Linda Marsh, took a plea deal. 12 years. Brian moved back home. Some days he talked. Some days he didn't. Healing, I knew, was never linear. One evening, I found him in the garage, holding Dennis's journal, tears soaking the pages. "I sold his car," Brian whispered. "For nothing." "You didn't know," I said, placing my hand on his shoulder. But he knew, Brian said. He knew what she was. And that was when I realized something important. Dennis didn't just leave evidence. He left forgiveness. Just when I thought the nightmare was over, I heard an engine outside one Saturday morning, a sound I never expected to hear again. And in that moment, everything came full circle. The engine's rumble reached me before the knock ever could. Low, deep, familiar in a way that made my chest tighten. I froze at the kitchen window, fingers still wrapped around my coffee mug. Outside, sunlight glinted off a shape I had convinced myself I would never see again. The Shelby sat in my driveway, burgundy paint gleaming, chrome catching the morning light like it had been waiting patiently to come home. Brian came down the stairs behind me. He stopped mid-step when he heard it. We stood there together, neither of us speaking, neither of us breathing properly. A man stepped out from behind the wheel. Tom Graves. He smiled gently and held the keys out toward me. I told Dennis I'd bring her back when the time was right. Brian's voice broke. I sold it. I didn't deserve. You were targeted, Tom said firmly. Your father knew that. He explained what I already suspected, that he never transferred ownership, that the money Brian received had been returned quietly after the arrest. This car was never mine, Tom said. It was Dennis's legacy. We opened the garage door together. The Shelby rolled back into the exact spot it had left months earlier, aligning perfectly with the oil stain on the concrete. When the engine shut off, the garage felt whole again. It smelled like motor oil and leather and something else, peace. Tom stayed for coffee, then left us alone. Brian and I stood in silence until he finally touched the hood, resting his forehead against it. I don't know how to make this right. You already are, I said. Weeks passed. Slowly, carefully, we rebuilt, not just the car, but ourselves. Brian started therapy. Twice a week. Some days were heavy. Others lighter. He began helping in the garage again, following Dennis's notes, learning what he'd once ignored. One Saturday morning, I held the keys. I think it's time, I said. Brian nodded, nervous but smiling. I sat in the driver's seat, adjusted the mirrors, checked the gauges exactly the way Dennis had written in his journal. When I turned the key, the engine roared to life, vibrating through my bones. We drove with the windows down. No destination. Just movement. This is what Dad wanted, Brian said, laughing through tears. For you to drive it. For us, I corrected. That evening, I made dinner while Brian set the table. The house felt quieter than it once had, but not empty. Healing had moved in, slowly unpacking. With the money Dennis left me, I made choices he would have approved of. I helped the men Vanessa hurt, paid Brian's remaining debt, secured my future without surrendering my independence. Months later, on a warm spring evening, I stood in the garage alone. The Shelby rested in its place. Dennis's tools lined the wall. His journal sat open on the bench. The final page caught my eye. Protect what matters. Teach what you can. Leave things better than you found them. Dennis had done all three. He didn't just save me. He saved our son. And he reminded me that even after loss, even after betrayal, the best chapters of life can still be written, if we are brave enough to finish the story ourselves. If you were in my place, would you have forgiven your child and trusted love again after everything was taken from you? Let me know. Because sometimes the hardest endings become the strongest beginnings.